理解一个人从他的成长环境开始。大家好，在本集开始之前，先提供一点背景知识。在美国成为医生是这么一个流程，本科读一个 Pre-Med 专业，一般是生物和化学，最少花费4年，然后开始考 MCAT。MCAT 是医学院录取所参考的一种标准化考试，获得 MCAT 成绩之后，申请医学院，录取之后，医学院一般读4年，前2年学习理论知识，第3年在医院各部门见习，第4年在医院里实习，通过一些考试，医学院就毕业了。在这之前的8年都是学费很高昂的。医学院毕业之后，需要申请各医院的住院医项目。住院医项目根据科室不同，大概需要花4到5年的时间。如果想学习更加细分专业的知识，在那之后还需要再做 fellowship， 要做1到2年。全部都完成之后，一个主治医师就练成了。本期分享的是嘉宾在医学院4年学习过程中的经历。Hello everyone, welcome to a Southern College Life. Today I'm very happy to have Chris here to share his experience in Rutgers Medical School. Chris, say hi to the audience.
Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Christian Cord. I graduated Rutgers in 2021.
At the very beginning, why you want to be a doctor?
Well, the very beginning for me is literally the very beginning. It was either a lawyer or a doctor when I was in preschool. Because I like arguing, but I also like to help people. And then my mother was a physical therapist, so she had a lot of anatomy textbooks. And instead of reading children's books a lot of the time, I would crack open an anatomy textbook and start learning Latin. So for some reason, it really just clicked with me, and I never let it go.
Well, that's really early.
Yeah, pretty early.
We all know it's very hard to get into a medical school. Describe a little bit about that journey for you. How did you get all the GPAs and how did you prepare for the MCAT?
Yeah. Well, I think for me in particular, I'm a very unique candidate, not necessarily in a good way. I don't think my experience was the normal. When I was in college, I really didn't know what I wanted to do, kind of lost my way in terms of, do I want to be in medicine? Do I want to be an engineer? So I originally went to Virginia Tech for engineering. I did not enjoy it. Just personally wasn't for me. So I had some trouble with grades, but then I made my way back in biology and just worked my tush off and got a fairly decent GPA out of it. My next 3 years were just making sure that all my classes were A or better, or at worst case a B+. And so my GPA sat right around the average of that time, which was I think about like a 3.6 or a 3.7 was like average or a little bit low for applying to medical school. And then at that point I said, okay, I'm not distinguishing myself there, but I'm solid. So I just treated it like trying to complete a puzzle. Like, what other pieces do I need to fit in to make myself the best looking applicant that I can possibly be? At that point, I graduated college and gave myself the summer to kind of think about it, make sure that this is what I wanted to do, because I didn't really have a lot of financial or family support for my application. Like, not a lot of people were kind of considering that this would be a path for me. And I had college advisors, one specific for medical school applications, saying, maybe nursing, maybe physical therapy or other great professions would be a little more attainable. But I knew I didn't want to do physical therapy because I'd seen my mother do it, and it wasn't for me. It takes a different type of person to do that every day. But basically, once I decided this is the path that I have to go down, I sat down to study for the MCAT for about anywhere from 12 to 16 hours a day. I'd pretty much wake up at 7 in the morning, make myself breakfast, and then I'd go back to my bedroom to study. Sometimes study courses I didn't really have a lot of experience with, like neuroscience or pharmacology type things. Those would be actual just sitting down with a Princeton review book or a Kaplan review book and just studying through those. And it would be like the abbreviated form, so like a pretty thin book. And then after that, the rest of it I figured was just test taking ability, not something that I'm typically strong with. So I sat down the rest of the day. So the studying was maybe 4 or 5 hours, and the rest of it I was just finding practice tests on the MCAT. So I would take at least one section in the morning, and then 2 sections in the afternoon per day to just figure out, okay, like my timing of each section, and then what types of questions am I getting wrong. So I really just boiled it down to kind of like a counting cards type thing. If I'm at a loss, like what are my best options per question? And then I scored fairly well on the MCAT. In July of the year, I got a call from the admissions office at Rutgers saying, "Hey, we have a spot. Do you want it?" I'm like, "Yeah, I guess I'll take it." But it was a tumultuous process. I was working in the meantime at some random jobs here and there, and then just trying to figure out, okay, do I apply again this next cycle, or do I try to get a master's? But a lot of just long hours luckily paid off.
For average medical school students, how many times did they take MCAT? Once or twice, or?
I can't remember. So at that point, this has been maybe 5 or 6 years ago. So at that point, I would say the average for somebody who did get into medical school at a certain point probably would have been just 2, maybe 3 times, because at a certain point, I think we did have to report other test grades, or at least report how many times you took the MCAT. So a medical school would know this person took 30 tries to get a decent score on the MCAT. I don't remember if you reported your best or your latest score. So pretty much like if I took it twice and my second one was lower, I would take it maybe a 3rd time and then hope that was higher, and then you pretty much just stick with that one. I think I took it twice. Once in college, that was a funny story. There was actually a blackout and we lost like all of our data. So I had to take it again. I took it once I graduated after all that studying and did well enough, and I'm like sticking with that score.
Do you think the blackout was an accident or somebody?
Yeah, hopefully somebody intentionally cut the telephone wires or telephone pole down, because that was a rough day.
Another huge issue is the tuition for medical school.
Mm-hmm.
How did you cope with that?
Well, I would like to say that I just went to Las Vegas and gambled a lot, but that probably wouldn't have worked out. Like I said, I didn't have any financial support from family or anybody close to me, so I figured probably the best way to pay for it would be to get the government to pay for it. Because I really did not want to have any more loans I already had loans from college. So before taking that MCAT the second time, I'd actually gone to see some military recruiters for the officer program for medical school. It's called HPSP, the Health Professions Scholarship Program. And long story short, I just talked to some people in the Army, and I talked to some people in the Navy. Felt like the Navy was a great fit. And then I just sat down, and for a few hours that evening that I met with the recruiter, we just started filling out the paperwork. He submitted everything and was like, "Hey, we'll let you know if we want you." And I said, "Great." And then a couple months later, they said, "Hey, you got a spot, so just let us know when you get into medical school and it's paid for." And now we're here, and I'm paying off my contract and practicing medicine.
So the first 2 years for the chemical school was still courses, like science courses. What was the most challenging courses for you?
I would say the most challenging ones are probably the ones that I can still remember. It would be all of the, I forget the exact class term, but basically all of the editing processes for DNA reproduction. So if there were like an error, it would be like the process of what mutation is it, and then like how is that fixed in a typical healthy human being, and then associating those with diseases. So if somebody didn't have the proper editing pathway, what would happen down the line. So if you were missing out on if there were a gene called MCMH, for example, that had an error in copying, what pathway would be fixing that? And then if that pathway weren't functioning, what disease would you present with? I think that was the most challenging one, because it had all of these random seeming acronyms, and sometimes it would be associated with like a number, so it'd be like WRT TAC 50. I'm like, well, that doesn't really roll off the tongue. So those are pretty tough courses.
And the facts are not really organized, kind of random.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it sounds very hard.
And that's unfortunately how most of that research works too. They're trying to find the reason for this disease, so they're working backwards from the negative consequence. So they're working backwards, and then different people are finding different genes and different editing mechanisms. So when you have different people coming together on the same thing, of course, and especially from different countries and cultures, they're going to name things differently. But then, of course, science likes to try to make that into a standardized naming system, like in organic chemistry and nomenclature for your different chemicals. But biology, it's a little more to the wind, I'd say. Not everybody has a standard for each certain gene they might find.
After the courses, is the clerkship.
Mm-hmm.
What was the most unexpected lessons you learned from clerkship?
I think the most unexpected thing is that the hardest part of medicine isn't necessarily the medicine. It is the leadership skills that someone would need to organize a team to effectively practice that medicine. So if you and I were on a team, for example, we hypothetically went to the same medical school, graduated with the same grades, did everything like identically, but we're different people.
Yeah.
So you might like to practice medicine kind of with a certain flair towards the patient-centered medicine side, like, you know, deciding what you and the patient think together is the best option. But hypothetically, I might say, well, the patient's not always right, so we need to do this and this instead, and ignore what the patient wants. And then that's going to clash if we're on the same team. And then things just aren't as efficient, they don't get done as easily. So having a third person, you know, that actual, the leader of the team there to kind of grease the wheels, make sure that your skills and your attributes are being used, and then same here, like that I'm being effectively used, so that instead of working against each other, we both further the goal of the team as a whole. So that's kind of the most unexpected thing that I learned, that it's not about the science, it's not about the research that goes into all this, because everybody has access to that. It's really about having somebody there to put all that into, you know, a well-functioning unit to drive that car forward.
I've been watching some drama or read some books about the emergency room stories.
Right.
I've seen in the curriculum for the acting internship, you also need to spend some time in the emergency room.
Mm-hmm.
So have you witnessed anything like memorable?
Oh yeah.
Please share one or two.
So the emergency room is a very fickle place. You'll either have nothing going on from day to day, which is something you don't want to say, because then if you're working and you're like, oh, it's very quiet, then you've totally ruined the rest of the shift. People are going to start coming in and having all these issues, and it's going to be a nightmare. But so some days I've had nothing happen, but other days I've had some pretty horrific things that I've seen. So I'll leave those out and I'll find the middle ground here. One was a Spanish-speaking male had come in, and I don't speak Spanish fluently, and everything was pretty hectic all over the ER everywhere else. So it was kind of just me and him, and I'm looking for a translator line. I'm looking for a nurse or a technician who might speak Spanish fluently that I could appropriately use to translate. So I finally find somebody, and I'm asking this guy, hey, what happened? Why are you here? And why is there like a big gash in the middle of your forehead? He had just a cut maybe like 5 centimeters long. And it was like a perfect line right in the center of his forehead. So I'm looking at it, I'm making sure his vitals and all that are stable, and I'm talking to him as I'm doing this and saying, so what happened? It turns out he was the passenger in a vehicle driving down one of the highways in Jersey, and a flying object came kind of like out of nowhere. It seems like it got kicked up by traffic on the road, and it was a brake pad from a vehicle that had fallen off or been taken off and left in the road, and it got shot straight through the windshield of their car and hit him in the head. So I'm talking to him, and he's perfectly fine, and then I get told that the x-ray of his head came back. I'm like, great, pardon me, I'm going to go look at this real quick. And meanwhile, I'm overhearing, oh, well, this guy's just got a laceration to the head, we're going to stitch it up, we're going to send him out. Oh, do you want neurosurgery to see him? No, there's no need, it's just a laceration. And then, the radiology report said there was no fracture. So I'm like, well, I'm going to go over and look at it. And I looked at the x-ray, and there's I would call it an island on the x-ray right in his forehead. The island was bone, and there was the water was a dark space on the x-ray, and it wasn't water, it was just air around that bone. So he had an open skull fracture. So I'm just chatting with this guy who got hit in the face with a brake pad, just coming back from work one day, and now he's got an open skull fracture that nobody else really picked up on. So I had to say, actually, I think we should get neurosurgery involved. So I don't really remember what happened after that because he kind of got whisked away, and I moved on to my other emergency patients. But that was an interesting one for sure. Kind of included everything, like a language barrier, a under-read on a radiology report, and a normal appearing person who could very, very quickly decompensate if they developed swelling or bleeding in that area. So that was one. And then I guess another one would just kind of fit in the general slew of things you typically see. Medical school specifically would be like we were trauma centers. You get people coming in from car accidents, shootings, stabbings, all that fun stuff. And this one person came in and she was in a car accident and she seemed fine, but she was, when they first come in, they're crying, they're screaming, but you didn't see anything wrong in particular. Nothing was frankly broken, bleeding, or what have you. But the standard operating procedure for any good trauma unit should be get the patient exposed. So you completely strip them of any shred of fabric and clothing, remove their earrings, their jewelry, everything. Like the person, just like me, I dressed myself today, put my watch on. I would not have the power at that point to choose what I do with my body, what I do with my clothes. Everything's just taken from you. It's not stolen, it's given to a security guard, but it was odd because, I saw her come in, and as somebody who's still fairly new to medicine, the naked human body is something normal now, but then it was kind of shocking to see somebody get disrobed by multiple people, because that's what you have to do. You have to have a lot of hands on deck to try to just help find any injuries you're missing. We cover the person up appropriately, if we're not examining a certain area, cover it with a blanket, keep them warm, and keep them modest because, it's a traumatic experience. But, for this person, luckily she was fine, but it was just the standard procedure, and it was good that we followed it because we confirmed that we weren't missing any injuries. And then you send them off to the CAT scan and make sure there's no internal injuries that we're missing. But it was just odd because she came in just screaming, crying, but overall looking okay, and then her monty is just stolen from her. But it is the best way to practice because she's not going to tell you that her leg is broken if she got hit in the head and is all fuzzy. But then you have the other person who got stabbed 16 times and isn't screaming and crying because he doesn't have any blood coming out of his wounds anymore, and you're just trying to find where all the stab wounds are and which one is the worst one you have to deal with. And it's kind of tough when they're all over his chest, but so you have this dichotomy of that person's fine, but they're the loudest one, and that person's not fine because they're dying. It's a rough time.
It's hard to decide which to focus.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We always, especially in trauma, talk about distracting injuries. Even so, between patients, it's tough to focus sometimes, and you have to really get a grasp for that personally through your own practice. But then determining per patient which injury is the worst. Honestly, am I worried about a broken leg if you got in a car accident, or am I more worried about the fact that your whole right side is numb and you can't move it? Probably more worried about the numb and can't move because you probably have some sort of a spinal cord injury, like a hemisection of the cord or what have you. And I have to figure out what level is that at, and are you going to be able to breathe for yourself in a few minutes, or are you going to start to suffocate because your diaphragm doesn't work? So even within a person, it's which thing should I focus on the most? And that part of triage is an art form. It's not a science until you're able to recognize, okay, this is the more concerning thing, and then you get down the pathway of injury and mechanism and treatment.
Exciting and very meaningful work. What's uniquely about Rutgers Medical School compared to other medical schools?
I think that's a tough question. It's a good question, but a tough question to answer, seeing as I only went to one medical school. But I think our location, the location that we were in, was fantastic. So I've worked at 2 trauma centers, one being Rutgers and then one being a hospital in Virginia. And Rutgers has, more recently, redone their ER. So their ER is huge compared to this other trauma center I was at. And just the patient flow that we get, the types of folks that come in are very varied. Because we have car accidents, stabbing, shootings, overdoses, domestic disputes that got physical, all these sorts of things. So it's very dynamic. You don't know what's coming in, and you don't know, if you're going to have a police officer or a sheriff or somebody who has to be there during your exam and all these things because the person's being detained for a suspected crime or what have you, or if it's like the police are there to protect that person because they were assaulted or shot at and they don't know the circumstances. But regardless of that, I think that the sheer volume and diversity of that differentiated from the Virginia Trauma Center. Rutgers has, I think, a great layout because they have a dedicated CAT scanner for the trauma unit. So you don't go down the hall, you go through the next door and there's your CT. They have their own dedicated thing behind, like a storage closet. This is a huge area behind the trauma unit that can go directly in from the patient rooms with all the equipment you could need. So I think whoever specifically was in charge, between the ER and trauma surgery and all that at Rutgers, I think it's those people, and then also whoever designed the layout of the ER and the trauma unit were outstanding in terms of their thought process, and that's something that set Rutgers apart for sure in terms of learning experience, in terms of patient care. I think in general it's just a great location for medical school as well. You have the rural areas, so if you don't want to spend 100% of your time studying in the hospital and you want to be a bit of a person every now and then too, there's plenty of stuff to do, like hiking, apple picking, all that types of fun stuff. But then you also have the city. You have New Brunswick, and you're a train ride away from the city, New York City. So you can have a life, but also that diversity of the area really brings in a lot of fun and interesting cases.
Town of New Jersey.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
How did you choose residency program after medical school?
The military is a bit tight right now in terms of what residencies are available. So without getting into too many details, I picked what was available, essentially. You would be told, your odds of getting this are 0, not because of who you are as a student or in your clinicals or anything like that, but because we have one spot for this, and somebody is out in the fleet, meaning they're not in a residency right now, but they're going to come back and do a residency. So they're just working as a general medical officer, so they're going to come back next year into the spot that I want. So they say, so for this next year, you can apply, but we can tell you right now that you won't get it because we already offered it to somebody else before you even thought of applying. So that's how the military does it. So I pretty much was like, well, I want to do surgery. The other option would be radiology because it's just, to very plainly put it, it's all of the job I do preparing for general surgery stuff or urology stuff. It's the same thing. I just don't execute the plan. So I have to still look at all the imaging, and I have to interpret it and understand it and look at literally everything. I can't miss something because, ultimately, as a surgeon, it's the responsibility of the surgeon to know everything in that body because I'm going to be touching it. And the radiologist should also feel that way, but, they're not the ones who are ultimately acting upon any, physical being. So I was like, well, yeah, so surgery or radiology. I would like both because there's a lot that I'm interested in. So I was going to apply to urology, but because of the standing of the military system, there wasn't going to be a spot, so I didn't apply. I instead, to make myself as available as possible, applied to general surgery and to radiology. General surgery, thinking I could just keep my skills sharp while I waited for that spot in the military to reopen in the next cycle. More of a political way of me going towards a residency rather than this is what I love, I want to do it. General surgery is not exactly what I love that I want to do for the rest of my life, but that's how I picked that because urology was really my passion.
Thank you again for coming on this little show and sharing all those interesting insights with us. If you want to see more of this interesting content, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Okay, bye bye.